Welcome again, everyone. Today is Saturday, June 1st. Everybody on?
Jim here.
Denny. Dave here.
All right, good. So today we're going to start off with, I guess, the obvious, tariffs. And tariffs, we'll talk extensively on that, and it does look like the wind is beginning to shift. We had a couple days where, if you think back in the past, whenever tariffs were brought up, gold would be pressured. And the last 2 days, tariffs were brought up, and gold actually moved higher. It may be that we're getting to the point where tariffs are not just going to be talked about; they're real. So, anyway, take it away, Denny. We'll dig into it.
All righty. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining yet another call with the boys. This week, I was a lucky man. I was totally offline for 5 full days with the family up in Montana, and I was having the time of my life on a horse, then in a fishing boat, then in a canoe. We did mountain biking, and suffice to say, the best part was I didn't get any news from anybody, not alternative media, not mainstream media. So this week, I've had a whole 24 hours just to gather questions up for the boys, but it's pretty obvious to me that it's about tariffs to begin with. So, guys, I'm going to ask you all three the same question, but just in a different situation. Bill, what's going to be the effect of tariffs on our relationship with China? Where's this going?
Well, obviously, when you're going back and forth with tariffs, I mean, that's like sandpaper against sandpaper. I mean, it will not smooth out relationships. It will make relationships rougher. Again, we've talked about this. I've written about this. Tariffs only come up when the pie stops growing, when there's need for a bigger slice of the pie. And that's what this is all about, is that the global economy has stalled or even shrinking. And what the reason for tariffs is because cash flow is beginning to wane, and you need a bigger slice of the pie to create the cash flow that you need to service the debt.
So as far as China is concerned, it's just going to be rough going. Do you think we'll end up with a trade agreement, or are they just going to tell us to go jump in the lake?
That's hard to say, but it looks like the U.S., if you're looking out longer term, past 3 months, 6 months, a year, if you're looking out 5 years, 10 years, to me it looks like the U.S. is isolating itself. We don't have the manufacturing. I read a story last night, I think 80% of our drugs come from China. So, it's not a one-way street. There's going to be pain here in the U.S. that we've not ever experienced before.
Jim, that same question. What's going to be the effect of tariffs on our relationship with Europe? There are tariffs in place in Europe right now. What's your perspective of what it's going to mean to us?
I think there's a fine target of that. In other words, where we say Europe, it's broad, in various industries, for everything from wine to goat cheese and back again. But that's not the point. The point is, what will it do to Mercedes? What will it do to the German auto industry? At a time when the quoted price of Deutsche Bank and the action of other banking and financial entities is a signal that should not be uncommon to anyone, a signal of financial failure. So what are we going to key, as it would be? What are we going to create by? What is going to be the immediate ramification of significant increases on auto taxes? And it would take that form because that's the most effective form. Against Germany within the EU, or if you wish, the heart of the EU. And my opinion is that is highly recessionary to the business activity in Europe. And tariff wars have never solved a problem that I know of. We could always go back to Smoot-Hawley tariffs, 1930s, and many people of significant intelligence who tie that in very much with the elongation and the depth of the Great Depression. So, playing with Germany, especially amongst the EU, with the automobile industry, if they do, is terribly counterproductive. And how do you defend against a tariff? What you do is you make your currency cheaper. So once you get full scale into tariff wars, what's the next war? The currency war. And if the United States wants a bigger piece of the pie, they're going to be working to depreciate the dollar. It doesn't argue for a higher dollar. So, and the EU right now is a wounded animal. The EU right now is suffering from a malignant dissolution, if you will. And nothing would speed that up than cause economic difficulties at varying degrees within the remaining members of the EU. So it's really something that is most inappropriate at this time, brought on by something. And let's be serious. One AR-15 round over the top of the fence would stop the migration or the invasion, if you will, of South America and every other country that wants to sneak people into the U.S. a lot faster than a tariff on Mexico will. If we got tough, just think this for a minute. Would you walk across this? Would you try to walk across the Swiss border and not talk and not stop and do all the things you do? They'd kill you. You can't do that. As a non-EU member, you can't do that, and even as an EU member. So we have an absolute invasion taking place with people who are they're starving to death. People who are in serious economic difficulty, with whom, kind of on the level of your heart, you have to understand. But mixed amongst them are terrorists, drug dealers, people who deal in children, and every other kind of fouls that you can possibly find because there's no vetting left. So we're talking about tariffs really getting their retraction out of a situation which, if it occurred in 1950, or if it occurred when Truman was president, or Eisenhower, would have been treated in a much different way as a full-out invasion. They would take out some of the invaders, the invasion would stop. So we're going to economics at a period of time when it is the least advisable, dumbest, most ill-timed thing we can do to accelerate a currency war, a run away from equities, and a dash into gold and the first reset. That's my take.
Dave, we have seen a new tariff starting off at 5% with Mexico and the threat to take it up to 25%. And it was interesting because this was in retaliation to a political situation. So, Dave, what do you think the effect of the tariffs on our relationship with Mexico, especially the president of Mexico, who has, very come right out and said that he is going to get as many people into the United States to take care of their health and welfare, and then encourage them to send their money back to Mexico. But I was just surprised that they used a tariff. What do you think what effect that will have with our relationship with Mexico? Will they come around, Dave, or will they stonewall us?
Let me sound like Donald Trump. Not good. Not good. Don't like it. It's not good, Denny. I mean, we've talked about this for over a year and a half. Tariffs are bad policies. Secondly, you cannot bully the world. It doesn't work. We're in a globalized economy. That being said, I understand the problem with immigration through Mexico to the United States. There's a lot of problems in the world. Intelligent business people sit down and communicate and articulate their points and then don't change their mind every 15 minutes. I mean, we heard that Trump renegotiated the best deal for NAFTA 2 that anybody could ever have negotiated. What happened to that? I mean, literally every day we have a new story. And I, for one, I'm tired of the stories. There's no coherent plan. It seems like we just are running around willy-nilly, and on any given day, anything could happen, anything could be said. Oh, I got a great letter from President Jinping, and everything's going to be fine. I've said from day one we would be on the losing end of trade wars. The United States is in a position where right now the facts clearly point that we are losing the trade war. Global economy is in trouble. Imports are down, exports are down even more. This isn't good for anybody because, as I said, and I'll use as an example, I grew up in Connecticut. In the old days, there was a place in Shelton that made gem nail clippers. They were sold everywhere. I recently had to run to the store and pick up a pair of nail clippers, toenail clippers. They were $1.82. Do you want to bet where they were made? China. I bought another pair of toenail clippers. Where do you think they were made? China. Trade wars aren't going to help anything. As Bill said, what's happening is that, and I don't want to say the pie is shrunk, there's less cream in the pie. So now we're fighting over the crust. So I don't see Mexico backing down, just as I didn't see China backing down. They really can't because there's no place to back down to. Be it Mexico sending us tomatoes or avocados, the United States supply chain relies on certain things functioning. And if every single day a company has to turn on the news to find out what the latest is, oh, we can't get sneakers into the United States. Oh, bicycles are a problem now. Oh, tomatoes are a problem. Avocados are a problem. Well, let's source this someplace else. There isn't readily available places to source a lot of it, especially when you're considering the food situation in the United States. Because as you know better than anybody, Denny, in the middle of the country, everything's still wet, is it not?
It is. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but Dave, it's incredible. We got farmers with 10% of their crop in right now, and it's serious because if they don't get the corn in pretty quick, they're going to have to roll over to beans only because it's a shorter growth cycle. It's ugly. I don't know how they can replace it, David.
Where are they going to sell the soybeans even if you grow them? Who wants them? China said, we don't want your soybeans.
Well, the skinny on that is that they do, and that's the public statement. But what I'm hearing from my farmer guys is that, relax, guys, we've got this covered. Get them in the ground, we'll get them sold, and we'll get them at a better price than the $7 or $8 where we are right now. But the fact of the matter is, Dave, we don't have the crop replacement for those type of food crops. We've got the basic grains, but we don't have the basic food crops that we find in the grocery store, and there's no question about that. Hey, Bill, this week while we were hiking in Montana with the grandkids, we came across the bones of this huge animal. And my daughter-in-law looks at it and she says, that's either an elk or a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And I bring this up because the first thing I read yesterday is that it might be the bones of the United States dollar. It looks like U.S. Treasuries are beginning to build up in the primary dealers. Nobody's stepping up to acquire them. So the primary bond dealers seem to be overstocked with Treasury bonds. Nobody wants them. Bill, if nobody's acquiring Treasuries, even on the short terms, what's this telling us about the U.S. dollar? This might be the beginning of a tipping point.
Well, it tells you that the lender or the buyer of the treasuries of last resort is the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is the one who issues the dollar. And when all is said and done, that is basic and outright monetization, and you'll end up with, like you saw, a big carcass. And I got a question for you, Denny. You didn't stand up in the canoe, did you?
No, why would you stand up in the canoe?
Okay, just
to fall in.
I will say this, that pantyhose joke about last week, it kept my knees safe, but I'm telling you, anybody who rides a horse...
Stop right there.
I'm just telling you, I jerked those things off for the third and fourth rides. I'm not wearing pantyhose again, period. Hey, Jim, if the U.S. dollar is... If the U.S. dollar is almost shot and people keep staying away from treasuries and we get the monetization, I get the feeling that the global reset is breathing down our necks. Any insight as to what that will look like and how quickly it will be coming, the reset?
I'd like to answer the question, but if you'd give me 30 seconds to add a bit on to the China discussion that you had with Bill.
Well, sure.
One thing that we haven't taken into consideration is that China does have a lock, an absolute lock, on high-tech raw materials. The things you can't build smart bombs with. You can't go hypersonic if you don't have. And you can go right down the list. They can shut down our high-tech, our ability to replace any tech we use now, and not to invent or make any better than we have now. And they have one small little tiny item that if they shuts down our military within 6 months. We should keep that in mind when we're discussing the potential for a tariff war. Now, some people have said poo-poo on that, but everyone who has never wrote a book about it or spent years studying it. So I assure you, I am right. They control it. We don't. And they can shut us down. And if they do, we become a third world military power in comparison to China and its allies. I've had a feeling that gold has been held down in price. Oh, yeah, for many reasons, but really so that the price they need to take it to effect a first reset is not so out of the park as to be shocking beyond belief. Because we've already scratched to 2,000, okay? And I don't recall the world ending the next day, or people even saying it would. 3,500 is not necessarily out of the ballpark that people would be out committing suicide over. The only way in a bankruptcy to return to any degree of normalcy, even one that might be a charade, is to increase your assets, to reduce your liabilities, to have certain jubilees like student loans or vets debts, or, things that look like you're doing a very right and correct thing. I mean, socially right. So the first reset it has a lot to do in terms of timing with what we're starting to see in front of us now, and would move into 2022, in my opinion. However, when have we ever done the right thing? And do we really have any gold? And can we even ever find out? The government is not going to have the Soviets come in and audit our gold. But the truth of the matter is, if you wanted a real audit, it has to be done by a wholly independent, not necessarily aggressively against it, but a wholly independent organization, or it's not an audit. So the ability to know whether or not the U.S. has any gold doesn't exist in taking a picture, which could easily be a brick sprayed with gold, with Rust-Oleum gold. It has to come from two things: account, of course, but then it has to also come from a melt and a test of the fineness randomly. The same way an audit on a brokerage firm walks around and randomly picks up a transaction and randomly audits that particular transaction. Not on one kind of stock, not on one kind of customer, but on all. That's why you get this, that. And if FASB did not sell their soul in allowing assets of no value to be valued to maturity, in other words, an assumption that they'll pay off, auditing today would be a very useful tool to understand balance sheets, but it isn't. So I put the reset within a 2 to 2.5 year period from today. I think it will be. It will not do what's necessary to cure a bankruptcy, even though we'll probably still have the greatest expert in bankruptcy you could have as a president. You must eliminate or reduce your debt. You must increase your income. You must tighten your belt. You must protect your main asset, whatever it happens to be, whether you're a farming country or a manufacturing country or a mining country or whatever it is. Of course, you attempt to protect what is your cash flow. But that's not going to be accomplished, in my opinion, by any group of people you see commenting on the boob box, who are called politicians, who are called economists. Even within the present administration, we have some weak points. The three of us, or four of us, would be more apt to be able to bring about a solution than any professional politician who defined by Truman, and he was very correct, saying anyone who is in this occupation called politics and retires rich is a crook. Took care of everything. Said it right away. There's a man who called a taxi cab to leave the White House. Okay? He and his wife, 2 bags on the back, and off they go. They didn't take the sheets. They didn't take the chairs. They didn't empty out Lincoln's room. They were real people. We don't have that. Okay? We've got some very spectacular people, and we've got some very determined people, and I think Trump is thinking the right thing. But he's more apt to be negotiating with business people than he really realizes that he's negotiating with a global entity right now. 2022, first reset. Second reset, totally by the market, somewhere around the end of 2024, and regrowth and peace thereafter.
Good job. Dave, for the most part, it looks like the United States is talking tough, as it always does. But it is really staying out of a shooting war. Any thoughts on if or when or where that might change and we get into a shooting war somewhere around the world?
When you say we're not in a shooting war, I just saw a headline that said we bombed an oil tanker that was heading to Syria. That I would call a shooting war. You blew up an oil tanker. You've tried to pin a false flag on Iran, saying that they may not have set the mines, but they produced the mines that somebody else attached to the Saudi and the Qatari ships. We're in a shooting war, Danny. I'm not sure whether you know it or not yet, but what I'm looking at, it sure looks like a shooting war to me. I mean, it hasn't turned into a street brawl yet, but it's certainly a shooting war. Russia has gone into the remaining territory in Syria and is bombing it into oblivion. So, to me, that's as close to a shooting war as you can get. There's bombs going off, bombs being dropped, ships being sunk. So I'm not in agreement. I think we are, in fact, in a shooting war as we speak. The question is can it remain contained? And if it's not contained, where does it go? And I don't think Iran is Iraq. I don't think we want Iraq. People could think what they want. We've been there how long now? And I would say we haven't won. I would say that if we dared start a war with Iran, even if you wanted to say we nuked the place and turned it into a glowing ember, that would have repercussions for the rest of the Middle East, because last I checked, the nuclear fallout would travel. It would not just stay in Iran unless they possess some special weapon that I don't know about that allows the glow to specifically stay over Iran. And
hey,
then
David,
that,
if we did aggressively go after Iran, you would, I think, most definitely see China and Russia stand up to that. Like you said, Iran is not Iraq.
well, and the world's learned a lesson. I mean, Colin Powell stood up there shaking the little vial. We know they have chemical weapons. Condoleezza Rice. What are we waiting for? A mushroom cloud over the United States. The New York Times, Judith Miller with the yellow cake uranium crap. I mean, I just look at it and yes, I believe we're in a war. The question is can it remain contained? And that I don't have an answer to. I don't believe our adversaries are blinking. Those days are gone. Only time's going to tell, but the shooting war has already started, in my opinion, Denny. The only thing that is right now we're shooting with small caliber weapons. How long it remains like that is anybody's guess because we're marching through the South China Sea demanding that China stop doing what they're doing. And, I just don't see that as a workable policy. That policy worked at one time going back to 30, 20, even 10 years ago. It's not working now. Libya is an absolute mess. Syria is a mess. We've gotten nowhere in Venezuela. We bullied how many countries just this week? I think I saw an article that said 36 countries we bullied just in the past week or two. So now I believe we're in a shooting war. The question is how much blood gets drawn. And I hope for calmer heads to prevail, but I don't believe that is going to happen because the neocons are in firm control, absolute firm control. They have, Bolton, Pompeo, Elliot Abrams. Those guys are the same washed out neocons that have been around now for God knows how long. So time will tell, but no, I believe the shooting war is fully in full mode. Let's just hope that calmer heads prevail and we don't start dropping nuclear bombs on each other.
Thanks, Dave. Bill, the effective funds rate, the EFTR, and the interest on excess reserves rate, the IOER, are almost identical. Now, to me, that sounds like a liquidity shortage at the Treasury because, to me, it looks like the Treasury is trying to use the bank's liquidity with overnight interest paying equivalent to the effective funds rate to cover their own illiquidity. How strapped do you think the Treasury really is at this point if those two rates are almost identical?
Well, you add in the yield curve. I mean, the system is becoming illiquid. When you get an inverted yield curve, that's showing illiquidity. And if you've got those two where there's no spread between them, then yeah, it's definitely showing that even as high up as the Treasury, the system is becoming more and more illiquid.
Jim, the irony to me is that the dollar is declining, yet it is still trending up in valuation. And I know you guys have gone over this, but hammer it into this old boy's head one more time. Gold looked like it woke up at the end of this week. Help me understand how the dollar can be dying and yet going up in valuation. I still don't get that, Jim.
Well, look at it this way. What is the demand for the dollar? Okay? You've got an item, call it whatever you want. Okay? Cashews. Dollars are cashews. Price is created by supply and demand. Same with the dollar. Sir Richard the Good, may his soul rest in peace, very astutely identified the singular most powerful area of demand for the U.S. dollar. And it wasn't economic activity, and it wasn't a rush to safety. What it was that for 50 or more years, especially accelerating lately, if China made a contract with Tanzania, but by the way, China just got thrown out of Tanzania, they would make the contract in dollars. The majority of all contracts globally on anything whatsoever, from Hershey bars to Caterpillar tractors,
Did we lose Jim? Did we lose Jim?
I think Jim just got clicked on.
That's all right. Then
I think it got. Hey, Denny, let me give you a separate answer to what I think you were asking.
So the question is, how can the dollar be declining and yet still going up in valuation? That's what I don't get.
What you're looking at is you're looking at the dollar versus the USDX. You're looking at the dollar versus other currencies, and have been for years, really, if you want to call it a race to the bottom. It's like all currencies are striving to be a lower valuation, which helps trade. And now it's coming to a head. It's coming to a head, and you're seeing that with the trade wars.
So you're telling me that the dollar can be dying and yet going up in valuation is just the tallest of the pygmies?
Because look at what the dollar's being compared to, versus the Mexican peso or versus the
technological difficulties. I don't know how in the dickens that happened.
While you were gone, Jim, we were talking about the
about the dollar at the time. I could call up. May I start off where I kind of left off?
Yeah, and let me let you know what we were just talking about.
Yeah, bring me up to date on what you guys have done, and then let me come in and finish up that little thing I was doing.
What I was mentioning to Denny is that the dollar is being compared. It's being compared versus other currencies. So while other currencies are weak, the dollar looks strong. But in fact, there is less and less demand for dollars because less and less contracts are being done in dollars. There's less demand for dollars now than there was a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Absolute mirror image, okay? 100% correct. In other words, as you look at the dollar, you're looking at a race of everything racing to the bottom. And the one going the fastest to the bottom is the weakest, Argentina. The ones that are slowly falling apart appear to be the strongest, but they're not rising in reality. They're not buying more in reality. So you're 100% correct on that, Bill, 100%. But the one area of demand that has created a sustenance to the dollar and allowed it to remain in the classification of declining the slowest over towards the bottom has been that as all these contracts come due, as they all do in time, it creates a demand for dollars to settle the obligations. And that settlement demand has been the singular largest area of demand for the U.S. dollar over the past, many years. But like anything which is an outliner, anomaly, it is limited in time. And as each month and day, year passes by, more of those contracts either fail or settle. Fail or settle will decrease the demand for dollars. After that, what's the demand for dollars? The idea that we're in the greatest boom in the history of mankind, unparalleled in history, is simply not true. It's simply not true. That things are better than they were, yeah, that's quite true. And cutting down on regulations helps a little. And even the PR of tax cuts, even if they weren't, helps. But we're not in an outrageous, flaming boom, that is for sure. While the rest of the world is entering or has entered into a recession. So please tell me, what's going to hold the dollar up and not as an effect of not holding the dollar up, transfer it then into the medium category of those rushing to the bottom. And then if the various things we've discussed that can bring on hyperinflation, like Smith-Hawley, tariffs in the 30s had a hand in bringing around in various countries in various ways. What's going to be the demand for the dollar? It's going down, okay? It's not going to die. It'll be here all the time. You're not going to get rid of the dollar. Because in order to buy eggs or small things, we're not going to do it either with our gold or our 10-cent silver coin for a loaf of bread. The dollar is headed for 5-6 on the USDX by 2022.
Jim, I'm going to ask.
That's part of the reason.
Dave has probably done more preparation than the three of us combined. Dave, if the rest of the world is dumping treasuries and using their U.S. dollars to settle contracts so that they get rid of them and burn them up, essentially, what will that mean to the business-as-usual sentiment that Americans have enjoyed in both standard of living and lifestyle? And, Dave, I'm asking you because I know people listen to this who have not prepared for squat. Well, give them a wake-up call. What's it going to mean to business as usual in their heads?
Well, we're in a situation where we've been lulled into not worrying about taking care of ourselves. When I say not worrying about taking care of ourselves, to the point where you watch people walk down the street and text. They jog down the street. They have earphones in. They're on the wrong side of the road. Their backs to traffic. We kind of created a nanny state where, okay, I'm at the crosswalk. Well, I could automatically cross the street. Well, you still should look up left and right, make sure the car coming spots you, knows you're in a crosswalk. Well, the same thing applies to our standard of living. We're used to getting cheap goods from China, cheap groceries from the grocery store. If and when, and let's go with if when. That was to...
Go with when.
Okay, Bill, you and I are definitely in the when category. But let's just take their side and say, if it happens, have you prepared? It's something as simple as how much groceries do you have on hand? We're at a tipping point, as we keep talking about. And again, nobody knows exactly how much the tip is going to occur, but do you want to be unprepared? It's like running around without car insurance, running around without health insurance, running around without house insurance, because nothing bad has ever happened. That's not a good way to prepare, especially in light of the things that, Jim's talking about regarding a reset, especially when you consider that the average American really doesn't have much in the line of cash savings. So I think, I think we would be in for a rude awakening, one that I'm hoping that people really don't have to go through. But throughout history, it seems that, we get these washout cycles, and it just keeps occurring over and over and over, and nobody wants to prepare for it. So, again, only time's going to tell how bad it gets, but obviously we can see that things are changing.
Dave, let me add just one thing to that. You mentioned historically we have washout cycles. Well, the washout cycles have always go back all the way, through all of history. The washout cycles come when they're caused by too much credit, when credit builds up. And where we are now is the biggest credit bubble in the history of history and dwarfs the combination of all credit bubbles combined in history. So this washout cycle is going to occur because there's too much debt, and it's going to be disastrous, again, because of the debt levels.
Bill, while you're talking, is the Fed going to be forced to cut interest rates and start another round of QE just to keep the game going for as long as it can. I mean, they're just about boxed in, buddy, and yet I think we will still end up being a banana republic at this rate. What do you think?
Yeah, they're absolutely boxed in. I mean, you can see it. You could see what happened in December. They were barely. If you look at a chart of Fed funds rates, you'll see definitely declining peaks and lower lows to the point where they got down to zero, and there were credits, and still are many credits around the world that are trading at negative rates. So the Fed had to blink, and they had to start talking about no longer raising rates. Now you've got the month of May behind us, pretty bad month, with June right in front of us, and the tariffs on top of all. The markets are going to force the Fed. They'll force their hand. They're going to have to lower interest rates, and they're going to have to print to oblivion.
Jim, if you were president, and I say that very respectfully, I know I'm not up for that job, but I do know a few things that I'd like to do. But if you were president, Jim, what would you do to fix the mess that has been created over the last 50 years? All right, Jim, President Sinclair, give me some of the things you do right off the bat.
Face the problem. Define the problem. Cure the problem. Take whatever fallout there might be. And if you end up being burned on a stake, so be it.
Financially, what would that mean? We got to deal with the debt. We've got to deal with the debt.
That would mean a country going bankrupt, facing its bankruptcy and curing its bankruptcy, because there is no other thing you can do. What are we fighting? Just that. What are we looking at now? It may change, of course, but right now we're looking at impeachment versus prosperity as the battle cry for the next election, presidential election. Will prosperity be here then? Impeachment will be. But will prosperity be? You can only cook the books so long. There's no way in the world a major recession, which the tariffs will help accelerate if they continue, can not impact the U.S. as or more seriously. That's the whole story. What do you do? You know, if you're robbing a bank and the police come in with AK-47 and you've got a pea shooter, what do? You stick your hands up in the air. Okay? What do you do if you got a major problem economically, which is only one thing, classic bankruptcy? Apply the rules of fixing a classic bankruptcy. Not going to make you popular. Probably got 4 years to do it. But you'd accomplish it in that period of time. What would Truman have done? Okay, a guy who sold hats and slacks and then dropped the atom bomb. Okay? He was a man who did what he had to do, and what he had to do was quite obvious unless we wanted to see another how many hundreds of thousands of our heroes dead in Japan. You know, the Japanese were quite the fighters. There were no easy group to overcome.
All right, so the 3-minute answer is you do what had to be done, face the bankruptcy, and deal with it.
Yeah, and if I end up with Vlad the Impaler, so be it.
That worked in Iceland, by the way.
Didn't it, though? Good old Iceland. So, Dave, let's talk about that. The Mueller investigation is over, and yet the House is still trying to keep it in the news. So Attorney General Barr says that their investigations are coming to a close, including, I'll get them all mixed up, but there's an Inspector General's report about the FBI. There's the uranium one. Dave, give me a prediction. What's going to happen here in the next, 3 to 6 months? With all these investigations, you're the one that believes the deep state's still in control and nothing's really changed. But what's going to happen with what these investigations have shown?
See, I stay in the camp that nothing's going to change. It's a great big distraction. It's like I was listening to the radio the other morning on the way home, and they were talking about, I forget who it was, about Russia interfering in the election. And I'm like, first off, everybody knows I don't vote, so I don't have an axe to grind on this. Please, if Russia interfered in the election, could somebody please show me proof, and don't point to Facebook and tell me that, well, they posted Facebook, advertisements. The real election meddling obviously comes out of Israel and Saudi Arabia, not Russia. I believe this is all a distraction. I don't think anything's coming of this. I don't think they're going to arrest the FBI agents. I don't think they're going to change anything. This just keeps dragging on. We're 2.5 years into it, and it's doing its job perfectly. When I say perfectly, it's keeping the public completely divided. They're not dealing with the problems that we're talking about, tariffs, about war, about people not having savings. And all you have is you have bickering back and forth and back and forth. It's like watching George Costanza's parents argue. It's going nowhere. I believe it's just a way of keeping the public pacified while each side argues their point. And I could be wrong, but for 2.5 years, I said I don't see anything changing, and in 2.5 years, I have seen nothing change. So my prediction going forward is expect more of the same, nothing changes.
Hey, Denny, can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
Okay. Dave, you're saying nothing has changed in the last 2.5 years, and I would say had Hillary won, none of the things that have been discovered would ever have come to light.
Let me stop you there. Is Anthony Weiner out of jail?
Yeah, but he went to jail.
Yeah, but Anthony Weiner is out of jail. All we heard for the longest time is even if the feds weren't going to investigate what's on the computer, the New York cops knew what was on it and it was going to be released.
Right, but Dave, none of this, Anthony Weiner, none of it would have even come to light in the first place.
But what became of it? So one creep went to jail for a very short period of time.
I understand. And addressing that, and I'll tell you, if nothing happens in the next year and a half up to the upcoming election, there's absolutely zero chance that Trump will be reelected, and you will have the conservative side of the country will go nuts. So something will come of this one way or the other. Either something is done, and if something's not done, you'll have conservatives going apeshit.
Yeah, I would think that there'd be pitchforks and shotguns in the street if nothing happens. But Bill, since you're talking, you and Jim talk a lot about the reset. In the 24 hours since I've been back, I read that the GLD fund has, I think lost is the best word, or converted 23 tons of gold. And my guess is that they're rating the gold fund, or the GLD fund, to come up with physical on delivery dates. But when there's no more gold, will this be the beginning of the reset? I'm still trying to nail down when the reset, maybe it's already begun, but I'm looking for that trigger point. Is it when something like the GLD fund goes bust?
More than likely it will be, whether it's GLD or COMEX or whatever, it will be a non-delivery event. Non-delivery will be the spark that lights it up. And actually, Jim, you might want to step in and talk about this. Here we are in June. You've talked about, June was the turning point. It was the beginning. So you might want to step in and talk about it.
Jim, if everybody's dumping U.S.-based assets like treasuries, if they're giving up their gold to make deliveries, will this not lead to the total isolation of the United States? But go ahead and step in and follow up with what Bill said.
Well, everybody wants us to give them the black swan, defined as the event that will bring about the process which will result in the reset. And I don't blame them, because that would make life quite easy. The reset is a product of every single thing we've discussed today, from proxy wars to tariffs to the control of strategic materials, metals, and goods, upon which all high-tech, upon which this telephone I have in my hand couldn't exist. So it's not going to be a singular item. The murder of an Australian duke or something that brings about the economic events. The pressure in the pot is getting hotter and bigger, and every steam pot, every pressure cooker, has a valve. And although they don't all pop out at the same temperature, they pretty well pop out all around the same temperature. And I'd rather say that it will be confidence. And confidence will be confidence that we can see in terms of finance is centered in the action of the U.S. dollar. So my position is that if you have to could only watch one thing, you'd watch the action of the U.S. dollar as the key to the win. It won't be any one singular thing. There may be no thing, except it may just fall out of the sky. But out of the sky, it's coming. And that's a given fact that can't be changed because of Bill's key point, which will be as famous as Richard the Good and the synthetic dollar short. The simple size of debt and the fact that we're going into a cashless environment is because there isn't enough cash to equal the debt. The only way to make enough cash equal the debt will be to create it in cyberspace. That doesn't mean that the dollar in cyberspace will have anything near the buying power that a dollar had when it was a silver certificate. End of story.
Jim, while you're talking, though...
Denny, let me ask Jim, when we first started off, I mentioned there was, for the first time, different action in gold on Thursday and Friday. In the past, whenever there was talk of tariffs, gold would be pressured and the financial press would come out and say, well, gold's down because of tariffs. And that changed on Thursday and really changed yesterday. Yesterday, gold was like a bulldozer in first gear and just ground it out higher and higher. You've talked about June this year as being the trigger point or the beginning. Do you believe that that's correct, that gold now, in the last couple of days, turned because the tariffs are becoming real rather than something that's just being talked about?
The risk is is no longer on the downside, Bill. The risk to having an opinion is on the upside. The risk is no longer to be bullish. The risk is to be bearish.
Okay.
The winds have changed. Circumstances are becoming better understood. And look, it's a common stock of the United States of America. And if your management is whacked, what's your common stock going to do? Well, it's not eternally up, that's for sure.
Jim, let's pull this down to a market that you probably know just as well as gold. London versus Shanghai in the silver markets. There's as much as a $2 difference in those markets. Is China paying more to take on more physical to make a point that the market is rigged? Or what might be going on with $2 arbitrage difference between the price of silver in London and Shanghai? What's going on there?
Well, the first thing you'd assume is there's something that interferes with the arbitrage, because an arbitrage, by definition, is a price equalizer. meaning if you buy it at one place and sell it at another, you appreciate one and depreciate the other. So my first take on that is that there is some factor that prevents an effective arbitrage. Now, that factor may exist in the physical versus the paper. I don't know where it exists. But I would tell you that I don't wholly believe that what you're seeing is a true and free market, but rather some exogenous factor that prevents rather than accelerates the arbitrage. Arbitrage equalizes. Arbitrage does not expand.
So somebody should be able to figure out how to make money on this $2 difference.
If they could, there wouldn't be no $2 difference. I mean, that's pure logic.
So
if you could figure out how to effectively make a $2 on a constant basis every 10 minutes, 24 hours a day, how long do you think there'd be a $2 difference?
Exactly.
Exogenous characteristic of the market, most likely on the delivery side, which is creating the impossibility of settling an arbitrage in a timely and effective way.
So those that have gold are definitely, those who have silver are definitely going to go to Shanghai and to hell with London. That's what that tells me.
Well, silver's gold on steroids. Silver will outperform gold in the beginning, and many other factors will have to be taken into consideration and what happens in the environment in determining how long silver holds that position. But it's always has been and always will be gold on steroids.
Bill, let me come back to you. Hugo Salinas Price is a very famous Mexican. I'm going to call him an economist, but he's really a businessman. And he stated that he believes that central banks are using some subsidiaries of their own to use as go-betweens to convert U.S. treasuries to gold and maybe silver, but he was focusing on gold. This has got to be good news for gold, Bill, but who in the world would want to exchange their gold for U.S. treasuries? Who would do that?
I have no answer for that. I mean, in my mindset, that'd be the most ridiculous trade in the world.
Somebody who had an effective use for the U.S. Treasury in bamboozling somebody else. That's the only answer.
Since we're talking...
Even Africa's gotten smart now, and China's takeover via lending is over. Africa's gotten smart.
There we go. Dave, I think that when we're talking about the word bamboozle, I think that Russia and China have played the international game so much better than the United States. And that doesn't make me disloyal to acknowledge that as an American. It really aggravates me to even have to say it. But the facts show that Putin has made business with Germany now, and my guess is that a military alliance might be next. So let's say that Putin does that with several other countries. Is there anything the United States can do to get what I call the business back? Because we're losing Germany as a business ally.
No, I don't think we can get the business back. I think we've alienated all our allies because our allies did business with us because they had to, because we had our boot on their throat, for lack of a better word, going back. I can't even, for as long as I've been alive, I've never understood why countries allow themselves to be bullied the way they are. And, I'll say by that, we keep telling people, well, you can't buy Iranian oil. I don't even understand why anybody would take that seriously. Turkey can't buy the S-400 system. India can't buy the S-400 system from Russia. If, in fact, we made the best weapons, countries would want to buy them. Maybe they're afraid that our weapons aren't the best. Maybe they're afraid that the weapons that we purchase from them will be fixed in such a way that they won't be able to defend themselves against us. So I don't see us, not in my lifetime, climbing out of this mess. We've dug ourselves a really deep hole, And we're now down in this hole yelling up at everybody that you can't do this and you can't do that. And if you do this, we're going to do that. That's not how I did business. That's not how. Everybody has to be a gentleman to start with. We can have our differences, but you still have to be a gentleman, because at the end of the day, we still do all have to get along unless you want to get into a slugfest. And again, as I said earlier, I don't think we're in a position to get into a slugfest, because as Bill said, if we get into a slugfest with Iran, I don't think China and Russia will sit by the sidelines. I don't see it. When we got into a slugfest with Syria, Russia came out and directly intervened. If it wasn't for Russia, we would have crushed Syria. Is everybody in agreement with that on the call here?
Sure.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the only thing that saved Syria from being totally crushed by ISIS, which was created by the CIA, the Mossad in England, was the fact that Russia came in and put a stop to it. So to think that is, Venezuela, same scenario. What stopped us from completely crushing Venezuela? Well, China started shipping in supplies, and so did Russia. So I think that's what we're going to see going forward. Unfortunately for Americans, I think we've been dealt a pretty crappy hand by our corporate and political leaders. And I believe they're doing their best to distract us from that by the bickering back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Because the sides are so divided, they aren't paying attention to, as Bill said earlier, we're standing up in a canoe, and canoes tip over. So that's just my take on it. And again, time will tell, but I just keep reading the tea leaves, and the tea leaves keep saying the exact same thing over and over again. Not good. Not good. Not the way to conduct business.
David, have you noticed in terms of diversions that Fox, the only thing they're missing on Fox is Spooky Mulder? That Fox is at least 15 minutes a night on UFOs. And the presentation is bent on the evidence shown on the shows of the U.S. Navy's photography and radar sightings of these strange things. And wouldn't that not be the ultimate diversion?
Yes, and we don't know if, in fact, what we're seeing on the radar and in these screens are not, in fact, objects that we possess.
Yes. How do we know?
No way to know.
You don't. There is no
guarantee.
Hey,
so you have to,
15 minutes a night, I'm telling you, it's a Spooky Mulder show.
So what you have to fall back onto is the powers that be have lied to us about everything our whole life. So what would make you think they're telling us the truth now?
Nothing. Nothing whatsoever.
That's my take on it.
Hey, Denny, let me give just a short, brief history. Your last question, and it ends up with where David just was, during our lifetimes we've been lied to. If you go back to World War II, basically that was fought on foreign land. The U.S., yes, we fought in it, but none of our production was injured. Our production was actually helped because we tooled up, we geared up for war. So we already had fabulous manufacturing, but that became even stronger because of World War II. So after World War II, you had countries looking to the United States for stability, for lack of any other better term. Other countries wanted to store their gold here. Other countries wanted to do business with the U.S. because the U.S. was stable. The U.S. was looked at as the white hat. And over time, and this happens with all empires, over time, we got fat. We got lazy. We got greedy. And with that comes cutting bad business deals. When I say cutting bad business deals, deals that are hugely favorable to us and hugely unfavorable to our trading partners. So over time, the U.S. became a bigger and bigger abuser or bully, and brings us, we became less and less competitive, and brings us to where David just got to, that during our lifetimes we've not been told the truth. And actually, you could put the date as November 22nd, 1963. That's the date where the total bullshit started. We've been lied to since then, and the lies have gotten bigger and bigger to the point where pretty much everything is a lie. So just wanted to add that in.
I think it was the perfect place to put it, Bill. We are just over an hour, but I will tell you this. There's an old saying about families and their money, and it is shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations, meaning that the first generation makes the money, the second generation squanders the money, and puts the third generation back at it. And I think the same thing could be said about government and where we are right now. The World War II generation coming off the World War I generation, they were the first generation. We have been the baby boomers in the middle, and we sort of squandered that birthright with some chicanery and really not good ethical business practices. And I point right at the neocons now. So now we're leaving the third generation, which will be the millennials, with a real mess. And I'm not sure I feel bad for them, but I'm not one of those guys in the middle generation that wasted everything. I've been working my fanny off to be that first generation. So with that, guys, that's all I've got for the week, and we're a little bit over an hour. So, Dave, I'll start with you. Have you got anything else to throw into the soup?
No. Nothing we haven't already covered.
You did a good job today, Dave. I'm not throwing you easy questions, and the same thing with you, Jim. Have you got anything else?
No. Just the respect for all of my associates on this call right now. I think it was great.
Yeah, I treat you as a great white father. I threw you that question, if you were president, what would you do? And really, that was not the answer that I was expecting, but that is the right answer, face the debt. So good job, Jim. And Bill, I'll throw it back to you. You got anything else for us tonight?
The only thing I've got is you should rename your farm a ranch, since now you're cowboyish.
I'm not a Texan, boy. I'm a Midwesterner.
Come on, you're you're a cowboy.
Yeah, thanks for covering for me last week, guys. Getting that in early allowed me to catch an early flight out and had just a great time with the family. Well, with that, I guess I'll see you all next week, okay?
Lord willing, see you guys.
Have a good weekend, guys.
Bye-bye. Have a great weekend, guys. Bye-bye.